Welcome to the Divinely Driven Results Show. My name is Elise Smith, Christian business strategist, and we get to empower Christian women entrepreneurs to be able to reach their sales goals by partnering with God, empowering their mindset, and utilizing biblical business strategy. Now, ladies, do you have a podcast, or have you been feeling your heart tugging towards a podcast? I know there are several women out there listening to this right now who have had podcasting on their mind and their heart, and that is how God speaks to us. But there's a couple of questions and concerns that we have when we're starting a podcast, and I can tell you it's easier than you think. And we have an incredible guest to help us out here today. But let's be honest, there are so many different marketing strategies out there, and we want to find a simple way to market our business that doesn't require showing up online every single day, which can get a little bit exhausting. And we want to generate those leads consistently. And so our incredible guest here today, she's going to walk you through how to start a podcast and how you can use your podcast to sell your offers and generate hot leads. I love that. Hot leads. We want not just warm, but hot. Andria Singletary is a podcast coach. She is a wife, mom of two, and she's a podcast coach and strategist. And she's the host of the Mama Turned Mompreneur podcast. I love that. She's passionate about supporting mompreneurs with creating a podcast that generates consistent leads for their business. So welcome, Andria. We are super excited to have you today.
Thank you so much for having me. And I just wanted to correct my last name. It's Singletary, not Singleton.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No worries.
Yes, absolutely. We got to fix that. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here today. So tell us, how did you get started in being a coach for this?
So I started in the online space as a virtual assistant and doing all the things, and realized I need to niche down in order to, avoid burnout and everything like that. And so at the time, I was a new mom and really had gotten into listening to podcasts. And so I started to wonder, who supports people with getting their podcasts out into the world and everything. And so I just going down this rabbit hole, I decided to pursue podcast management. Absolutely loved it. And as I started working with more and more clients, one of the things I saw was that I was really able to help them create podcast content that helped them generate leads for their business. So really use their podcast as their main form of marketing. And a lot of my clients, they would call me their coach, even though that was not a title I held, never considered myself a coach. And so earlier this year, just like nudging from the Lord and my clients and everything, I decided to fully pivot into a coaching role and absolutely love it. Just really being able to support my clients with not just, figuring out how to fit this podcast into their business, into their marketing strategy, but really helping them get over like those mindset blocks that comes up with podcasting. Because it does happen, especially you're really putting yourself out there. It can be very vulnerable, and, you want to create engaging content and everything. So yeah, that's kind of like how I got started.
Oh, I love that. I love when it comes from that personal experience too. I think it makes such a huge difference. And so tell us, well, we want to see in the comments below, tell us if you have a podcast, share the podcast link. Let's network on this as well. And then if you are feeling called to be a podcaster, tell us about that as well. We want to hear all about you guys. So what do you think when you talk to someone who wants to start a podcast, what is their first question, Andria?
Honestly, how to get started. There's so much information out there, and it's very overwhelming. You have YouTube, you have so many different podcasts, courses to choose from. You have a lot of people who, call themselves podcast coaches, podcast managers, podcast launch strategists. It's just so much information out there. And I think a lot of times people are just like, it's information overload, and they get overwhelmed and are like, I just don't know where to start. I don't know what information is right, what is actually going to help me achieve my goals and everything. So I think that is like one of the main things I am asked. And it's just really, I like to help people by like really just giving them the basics of what they actually need to get started. I am all about starting scrappy. And the reason why is like, we can get so caught up in our heads that we'll never take action. And so I rather you just get something out there so you can get started and then learn as you go. So I like to just give people the basics of like where to host your podcast, what type of equipment you actually need. I really don't even dive that deep into editing because even that you can get caught up in it as well. So really just the bare minimum so they can get their content out there.
Yeah, I love that concept of starting with what you have and that bare minimum, because I think a lot of times our creative brain kind of starts to take over and we're like, oh, we could do this and we could do this. And especially when it comes to editing and all the fun things. But the point is to get our message that God has given us out to the world, right? It doesn't have to be perfect. And I think that your inner dream stealer or Satan can come
Mhm.
in and, have you second guess, am I good on camera, or do I have a good message, or is my equipment correct, and all of those different types of things. So the fact that you're teaching people to start with the very basics, I think it kind of helps to squash some of those issues. And it's great. So when it comes to, having fear of starting a podcast, talk to us about how you help your clients with that.
Yeah, so a lot of times that fear comes from, there are a lot of podcasts out there, and 9 times out of 10, there's already a podcast in your niche. And so a big thing that comes up from my clients is, well, how am I going to stand out? Why are people going to want to actually listen to my podcast? And one of the things I like to tell them is that there is only one you. You can only explain things in a certain way. You are called to a certain group of people. And so they are waiting on you to get your message out there, to share, this amazing content and everything. And so when you shift your perspective that way and really focus on like what your gifts are, what your callings are, and how you can present it in a way that no one else can, you're able to move past that fear and you feel that urgency like, okay, there are people waiting on me, that they're relying on me. They want to hear from me. Like for instance, with my podcast, there are so many mompreneur podcasts out there. And there are a lot of podcasts too that are about podcasting. But I'm able to explain things in a way that it clicks for my audience. And so that's what I focus on. If I'm providing value to them, I am meeting that need that they have. That's all that matters at the end of the day.
So powerfully said. Yeah, because we are the only people who are going to attract those specifically divine clients, right? Is that, don't worry about all the competitors out there. There's no competition in the kingdom of God anyway.
Mhm.
And so just share that message that God has put on your heart and you will attract those people. They may not be attracted to other people, but they're attracted to you just for getting out there. So that's so powerful. And in remembering that we are unique daughters of God and we have that message given to us to share. So awesome, awesome, awesome. So what other tips can you give us when someone is starting a podcast?
Yeah. So, specifically, if you are creating a podcast for your business, your podcast needs to be connected to your business. So, whatever your niche is business wise, that needs to be reflected in your podcast content. So I think that is like one of the main things. And then also, to don't be afraid to promote your offers on your podcast. You should be selling in your podcast episodes. Your audience should know what it is that you do and how you serve, and you want to do that consistently, sharing that with them, because a lot of times we assume that, oh, I've already said it once, I don't need to say it again. And it's not true. They've said that like people need about 8 touch points before they decide to move forward with an offer. And so you have to every episode talk about your offers, what it is that you do, but also too remembering that you have new people coming into your podcasting world every week. So you have to assume that there are new people there who haven't heard about what it is that you do and how you serve. So just being consistent with that in your podcast content is huge.
Yeah. And you never know when that's going to hit someone, right? They may hear, that you talk about your products or your services or your freebie or whatever that might be over and over and over again. And then one day it hits them differently and they're like, oh man, I need to contact Andrea. Like, this is
Yes.
what I need. So I think that's such great advice, because you're not just using your podcast to share the message that God has given you. You're doing it to share the message God has given you so that you can build your kingdom business bigger and
Mhm.
serve more people, right? That's what the whole thing is all about, is serving other people that God is going to give you or has given you already. So that's perfect. And that was actually going to be my next question, is how do you truly monetize your podcast? Because there's so many amateurs out there with podcasting that they just don't know how to monetize it. So any other tips around that? Definitely offer something, but what else?
Yes. So again, like really looking at your podcast as part of your marketing and sales strategy. And so I push my clients to, even like if they're launching a new offer, launching a new program, their podcast content needs to be part of that launch strategy. And so we'll, create all this content for social media, do the email marketing. And a lot of times we forget about our podcast, but it's like, no, that same type of content needs to be created for your podcast. So if you're doing, a week long launch, then you need to have podcast content that reflects whatever it is that you're launching. So really just looking at your podcast differently. It is more than just getting, visibility, more than just building community. It's part of your sales strategy. And so you need to be looking at creating podcast content that is going to highlight your offer. So highlight the benefits and transformations that your offer bring, helping your audience understand why they need this offer, even, educating them on different things related to your offer. So really, however else you create content, you want to repurpose that for your podcast. So that way you are including it as part of, this marketing and sales strategy.
Oh, yes. I feel like you could just drop the mic on that, girl. That was powerful stuff. Yes, I completely agree. Is that, don't look at it as like this different platform that you have. It's all part of the marketing strategy. And I was just thinking, I'm like, I'm not sure I've ever used my podcast in that way before. So I am learning so much from you right now. And it's powerful stuff, because our whole purpose is to grow our businesses to serve those people like we talked about. And so if we're not using every single platform and every single thing that we're feeling called to use to the best of our ability, then we can possibly lose that, right? I know I've put so much time and energy and effort into my own podcast. And until I started implementing some of these things that you're talking about, and now I'm going to even implement what you just talked about, it really didn't give me too much of a return on my investment. But I think that if you can start that way from the very beginning, right? I think it's Franklin Covey that always says, Stephen Covey, who always says, start with the end in mind. I think that's exactly what you're talking about there. So powerful, powerful. Now, I think that a lot of times people are a little nervous to start a podcast because they're afraid they're going to run out of content, or, how do they create their content? Can you give us some tips around that?
Yeah, so there's several ways I like to come up with content. So like if I'm focusing on promoting a specific offer, there's like several questions I ask myself about this offer, basically looking at it from the perspective of my ideal client. And so it's like, what do they need to be educated on? What are some misconceptions they have about this specific offer? What are they currently doing that's not working for them? So really looking at creating content to help them have that mindset shift that they need, so that way they can make that informed decision that this is the offer for them. So creating content like that, but also to polling your audience, surveying your audience. Another thing I like to do is I will go in Facebook groups where my ideal clients are hanging out at, and just search, certain keywords to see like what questions they're asking about what it is that I do. So when it comes to, I'm all about podcasting. So I'll literally go in like a mompreneur group and just search podcasts and see what questions are coming up. And I've been able to create so much content that way. Like I just published episode 80 lady with my podcast today. And I still have a laundry list of topics and everything. But there's so much content around you. So like even your current clients that you're working with, what questions have they had, working with you or before they even started working with you? I've done that where I've pulled questions from like clients I've worked with and turned it into a podcast episode. So again, when you're looking at your podcast as being part of your business, you're going to have so many content ideas. Like I have people randomly DM me questions about podcasting and turn it into an entire podcast episode. And it's nice because it's like they know that I'm listening and they're like, wow, she created a whole podcast episode about this question I had. So, being able to serve them that way and bring that value.
Wow. Talk about meeting people where they're at, right? I mean, Jesus Christ is the exemplar of all of that. And that's exactly what we're trying to do is, figure out what it is that they are needing or wanting and then deliver it. That's really what business is fundamentally made up of. So any other tips or tricks that you would say in starting a podcast or monetizing a podcast? Anything else that God has put on your heart to share with us?
One of the things I will say, because I see this happen a lot, where people will like, okay, I'm just going to do interviews on my podcast. And there's nothing wrong with doing interviews. That is a great way to serve your audience, but you also want to make sure you're doing solo episodes too, because this is going to allow your audience to get to know you and really build that know, like, and trust factor. And when you do it effectively, your podcast can literally close sales for you. And so just to kind of give an example, I've literally closed sales, like 4-figure sales, just from my podcast content alone. And each time people have said, I listened to your podcast and I knew that I could trust you. Now, if I had never done any solo episodes, they would have never known that about me, because in your interviews, you're highlighting your guests. Like, yes, you're contributing to the conversation, but your audience doesn't get to really know like what it is that you do and how you're the expert in your niche and everything. And so I really like to stress that, because like I said, I see it a lot of times where it's like, okay, we're just going to do guest interviews. And it's like, no, put yourself out there and do a mix of solo and guest episodes. So.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I hope you guys have been writing down these notes, because she is just dropping golden nuggets here all over the place. So Andria, if they want to connect with you more, how can they do so?
Yeah. So, like I mentioned earlier, I have my podcast, Mama Turned Mompreneur, and I share all types of podcasting tips for mom business owners. So if you're really looking to turn your podcast into a lead generation tool for your business, I provide a lot of valuable content on that, as well as I have guest experts that share other aspects of balancing motherhood and entrepreneurship and growing a business as a mom. So that is the main way to connect with me. I'm also available on Instagram, but my podcast, I like to drive everyone that way, because that is where you get to know all about me and how I can best support you.
And I love how she drives everyone to her podcast, right? And that is such a great reminder to all of us. So I will tell you, we have a podcast called Divinely Driven Results. So make sure you come and check that out as well. And just, I would say, go and follow what Andria is teaching. That's amazing. I don't think that we have to let fear stop us. In fact, 2 Timothy 1:7 talks about how God is not a God of fear. So if you've been feeling that pull to start a podcast, or if you have a podcast and you just haven't known exactly how to create revenue from it, contact Andria. She is your gal for sure. Love this interview. If you guys want more great tips on how to build your business in the Lord's way and connect with other Christian women entrepreneurs, make sure you come and check out our Faithful Ladypreneurs Facebook group. We also have the ability to advertise your business on Saturday's comment thread, and you'll learn more about our podcast that we have coming up as well. So check out Faithful Ladypreneurs and check out Mama Turned Mompreneur podcast. Thanks so much for being here, Andria.
Thank you for having me.